Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton where all my troubles are forgotten. Look away, look away, look away to Dixieland. So when I made the work, I went to a dance class that got canceled. And I was walking to the bus stop. This is during COVID time. And this happens every year. I wish I was in Dixie, away, away. In Dixieland, I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. During Memorial Day or Veterans Day, they'll put the Confederate flags in that specific Confederate cemetery from the Civil War. Away, away, to live and die in Dixie. Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton where all my troubles are forgotten. Look away, look away, look away to Dixieland. I just was so angry because I was heavily involved with Black Lives Matter stuff. So I got triggered, man, and so there's cameras everywhere. It's like 4 blocks of historical cemeteries, but there's only cameras specifically in the Confederate cemetery. So I sat there and I waited until nightfall. Ha hey, ha hey. John Wayne's teeth, are they plastic, are they steel?
Wow.
To take them, so
How long did it take?
I mean, I was there for maybe 4 hours, I guess.
That's a long time. That's commitment.
There was a lot. Oh, I wasn't leaving.
Yeah. There was a lot.
There were so many flags. It was so disgusting. Mind you, this is in the East Side, historically black neighborhood. So as a mom, my immediate thought is like, I don't want kids to see this and grow up like I did, thinking it's normal.
Yeah.
Because we're growing up in Texas. All this stuff is normalized, right? And so the truth is, because of that, I know the lyrics and the song of the Dixie song. Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. I know that song because my mom would sing it around the house or whatever.
Yeah.
And the feeling that I had though when I was seeing that was I wanted to scalp somebody. But I don't know any songs. Now, a couple of years later or whatever, I might be able to sing a peyote song. But nothing as natural as that Dixie song. And I personally didn't go around singing it, but yet I knew all the words when I saw the Confederate flags and I started singing it. And in my mind I was thinking, my kids will never learn this song, and so I just kind of teased the burial grounds by singing it, knowing I was going to take the flags. And it was a beautiful sunset with the sky was hot pink. That whole evening, it was just really beautiful. And the only song that I could burst out in defiance or whatever was this little powwow song from a movie that hasn't aged well, really. Is what is the name of this movie? It's a staple of Native American films. Smoke Signals, is right. It's a classic, I guess, but that's the song that I could burst out. Like that was the only thing that I could like access was to sing that song. And that's embarrassing. You know what I mean? Like,
it's like by whatever means necessary, you know, if that's like the only thing.
I completely agree, and that's what these markings on my face and neck are. You know, it's changing the idea of what brown people look like or whatever, and kind of reclaiming that. But at the same time, they don't mean anything.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I don't need people to like, I guess when I first got them, people would ask like, what do they mean? Or did you get approval from some tribe or whatever? No. Yet at the same time, chin tattoos are historically in Texas, within within tribes of Texas. So like, and I learned that after. And then you go to the Witty and like the little like model people they have.
Oh, that's crazy.
I know. So, yeah. After I got all the flags, I stuffed them, and I had to break the sticks to get them to fit in my little bag. And then I caught the bus. I was trying to catch the bus to get home because I was like, I can't be caught with this. Or I don't know why I was paranoid about getting caught. All the cameras. And they were like stuffed, packed in my bag. And then I waited for the bus, and then when I got on the bus, they were like, oh, you can't get on here unless you have your mask on. It's COVID.
Oh, that's crazy. That's really
And
funny.
my mask was at the very bottom of all these Confederate flags that were broken up and torn up in my bag, so I'm not going to empty that out in front of everyone.
And you're like, oh, what? I don't want to explain this.
Yeah. So I walked home.
We're just willing to go through more like physical strain, like weirdly uncomfortable time-based and physical situations. And it's almost like, I don't know, I know when I do that kind of stuff, that's part of it. It's like there's something about the strain, you know, like the discomfort that I have to go through, like all of these weird situations, like waiting for the amount of time that you did, 4 hours of waiting, the danger of collecting the flags, vocalizing while you're doing it, it draws more attention. Then having to travel and choosing to go by foot, partially because it was probably not safe for you to, you know, you have to worry about, you know, like what might happen if you're like visibly seen with all of these torn up flags, you know, but
I don't have bail money.
right. The willingness to go through like the difficulty like that, it's for the idea, like the act is worth it.
And why I videotaped it is so weird too, because like,
oh, good point.
Like I'm not a performance artist,
right?
Like I wasn't even really an artist back then,
right? So, and you don't necessarily even need to ever think about it in those terms, you know. Like I mean, I say that it's art, but I don't know. I also think that like, you can describe it as performance art, you can describe it as activism, but you can also just like, maybe like we like need new terms for that kind of stuff, you know, because I don't know.
I like what you're exploring now, because in the Limit experience, because that really was what it was, because it was spontaneous. You know, I was recording it not to show anybody.
Yeah. But
for some reason, I felt like it was important.
Yeah.
Enough to videotape, to record.
Right.
And so, yeah.
And that's like a really, to use a word that like a lot of art people don't like, which I don't know, I just disagree with. It's a very authentic action, and I just don't see what the problem with that is in art. Like, are we just too cool to be genuine? Like, I don't think that's a problem, to be very authentic, and then to be like, well, I did this authentic thing. Maybe you'll think it's art, maybe you won't. Who cares?
I need a certain amount of adrenaline.
Yeah.
Because Otherwise, I go looking for it in different kinds
that's what it is.
of avenues, you know. I was even thinking about going to San Marcos and taking those skydiving classes and
my
like
God,
jumping
yeah.
out of a plane. I was like, maybe that would be healthy.
Yeah. As I continued to think about Angie's submission for the Limit Experience Project, which is an action that takes place in a cemetery filled with Confederate flags. And the action is that the Confederate flags are pulled up while Angie's singing a native hymn. I just couldn't stop thinking about another thing that I've been really focused on lately, which is how art isn't just an object of contemplation, though sometimes and often art is much more of an obvious object than what Angie's done. But it's not just this thing that we look at. It's not a thing that affects us only under limited circumstances, or at least it doesn't have to be something that affects us only under limited circumstances. I've been thinking about how it's immediately effective in the environment of its making and of its viewing. Really, I've been thinking more about the consequences of artworks, like how they're functioning, how they're influencing the world around them, than about their kind of meaning and just like a world of knowledge and thought, which is, I think, where they're currently stuck. So I started formulating this idea about just focusing on that affective power of art and how that moves and influences people in the immediate environment. And I thought Angie's work would be a really good way to think through this. It's turned into a much deeper thought for me, and I'm writing a longer essay about it. But I want to get Angie's work included in all of the Limit Experience discussion that already exists. So I thought it would be a better idea for me to articulate my thoughts about this just in video voice form. So I started having this thought early in the summer. I was reading some about ancient Jewish mystical traditions and came across this particular analysis by this scholar in which he compared, or actually contrasted, the way that images work, or it was really specifically symbols, the way that symbols work in Jewish mystical traditions with how symbols work in like modern Western traditions of representation. And he used Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure, to explain the idea. So Saussure says that the sign and signifier have an arbitrary relationship. So if I say I want to represent an apple with a symbol, the symbol could be literally anything, as long as it plays by that literally anything, that X equals apple, A equals apple, some squiggly line equals apple, as long as participants in whatever language structure we're in could comprehend that symbol. So that could be anything, the relationship between the thing that is signified and the sign that signifies it is arbitrary, according to Saussure. And that automatically puts language into this kind of abstract category. So when I think about abstraction like that, I think of it as like outside of like the immediately influential realm. Or at least maybe that's just an assumption that I'm making, or that we've kind of gotten to a habit of making. But I'll just stop there with that one for now. The way that this ancient Jewish mystical tradition treats symbols is really different. And they treat symbols in this way. So in this situation, the symbol, as soon as it's extruded from the person creating it, has as much force within it on the world as the thing that it was signifying. It immediately takes on kind of a life of its own. And it doesn't just originate from an arbitrary decision. It originates from a process that acknowledges the influence of the environment on the person who's generating the symbol. And so the artist, the symbol, and the thing that's being symbolized. So we could just say that it's an apple. So say I'm an artist making a symbol of an apple. And you could imagine that space where the artist is standing in a studio. There's an apple, maybe in a still life, sitting off in the distance. And then there's a painting or something on an easel, an image on an easel, where the symbol is being extruded. And the idea in the Jewish mystical tradition would be that that symbol doesn't emerge from nowhere. That symbol emerges, it's not arbitrary, it's not random, it emerges as this interaction between the artist and the quote-unquote real apple. And when the symbol has been extruded, it's its own thing, and it's then exerting a kind of influence over that entire system as well. And I immediately was struck by this, because that's how I feel that my artwork, that's always how I think about my art working. I've never thought of it as arbitrary. And of course, this was in terms of language, but I couldn't let go of this thought that this has some important bearing on art practice and on the like inherent power of art objects, which is how I see them. I see them as not alive, they're not conscious, but they're maybe even more powerful than conscious. We give so much credit to consciousness. So I approached Angie's work again, thinking about that idea of the active power of art on the environment, and the impulse that artists who are not so interested in kind of a traditional art system, art hierarchy, are drawn to this type that allows work to be clearly influential in the environment, like Angie's work. So Angie's work wasn't an object of contemplation. Now maybe it's kind of an object of contemplation for us after the fact. It's giving me a chance to think through some ideas. But it was having an immediate effect on her, and that was its purpose in the instant that she was enacting it. The singing of the hymn, the removing of the flags, those things all have an immediate effect. Not just a literal one, like, well, the flag was there once, one moment, and now it's gone, but a effect on Angie's consciousness, on her feeling of presence in that space, of her position in the space. I'm hesitating to go towards like kind of the obvious territory of like emotional well-being, because I think that there are other ways of seeing this, and that unfortunately there's too many associations with like individual well-being and like art discussions that are like not really positive, or that, you know, immediately get that kind of thinking like disregarded or dismissed. So I don't want to take it into that territory, even though I think that that's definitely part of it, and I don't think that it's an unimportant or minor part. But yeah, Angie's work really made me think of this idea more deeply, and maybe that's enough right now. Maybe that's where I'll leave it. That I'm thinking about different types of art objects, what the boundaries of them are. So Angie's boundary of her art object would be this like amorphous, impossible to fully define, like in space boundary of her moving around, of like how far her voice carried, of removing the flags. And there's this immediate effect on the environment that I'm interested in. And I'm thinking back to the example of the symbol of the apple in the artist's studio with the still life. I think maybe one more thing that seems important is to say that both of those kinds of art objects, the one with the like really amorphous, undefinable border that has this like clear, immediate effect on the environment, like this performance, as well as just like the symbol of the still life, the symbol of the apple contained in the still life, they would both be actively, immediately influencing the world around them, the way that I see art for myself. They're just doing it at different rates, and maybe with like different qualities. So yeah, I think that's really important to the limit experience idea, because, okay, one more level. I'm gonna go one more level here. And if you've been listening to my recordings and the videos that I've made for limit experience, which you probably haven't been, then this might sound familiar. But this is like the other part of this argument. I think that the way that we conceive of art as a representation with a kind of arbitrary relationship to the real world, where after the thing has been represented, it loses its connection both to the thing that was being represented, and then it stays kind of in this intentionally closed off, non-influential state of like contemplation, like where we're just musing about an object because we see it as not influential on the immediate environment. I think that that's not good for artists or art objects. I think that artists and art objects' inherent powers are being overly contained through ideas that are associated with representation that have to do with like the vitality of a real thing being lost in the process of representation, which I think that's false. So the symbol of the apple is not less powerful than the apple. It might actually be a lot more powerful. And then also
I have this other idea that I'm working on. That's harder to articulate, but that's about how when artworks get consumed and shown in institutions, they're contained like that. You know, we interpret them as less vital than the thing that they represented generally, and they're also like physically kind of forced into these almost like, I'm just going to say it, I'm going to be really dramatic, these almost like prison-like conditions or like school-like conditions. I'm going Foucault here. So like a museum, an institution, a museum is kind of like when you make a student sit at a desk for, 9 hours straight and you don't really let them live. I also think about the way that we treat art in institutions as like being in a laboratory, where everything's sterile and extremely bright, and where the specimens are dead. Like I think of like a frog being dissected and it's like pinned to the dissection table, and that's kind of how artworks feel to me in gallery or museum. And so there's this like extreme control exerted over the objects. They're not alive in the world. They're not allowed to be. They're contained in this way that to me has always felt kind of disturbing. And yeah, it's interesting because they lose power by that, by our assumption about them being reduced to this area of musing. And I think that representation, the way that we assume representation takes away the inherent vitality of reality, has something to do with that. So they're losing power in that way. And then once they've been contained in that museum setting, and their affective power has been kind of closed off, we do something else with them, which is that we have to kind of re-inject them with meaning and influence, re-inject them with a again derived version of the kind of power that we took away from them. And we do that through complex language, like criticism, writing about what they mean, representing them through like extremely complex language, metaphorical language, theoretical language, the language of like whatever discipline you want to put on it. But it's interesting because the artwork loses its vitality through the process of representation, but the institution gains power and influence and control over the artwork by representing the artwork with this extremely complex language. So it's like this, I feel like I'm starting to see this whole thing as like this, this big conspiracy to contain the wild spirit of art. And I don't know if I'll continue to think that as I work through this project, but that's how I see Angie's work, is that, and work like this, that's especially work that's made outside of an institution and that's not really made for an institution, which, come on, let's face it, like all of us are really making work for institutions. If we get trained as artists, unfortunately, that's what we're doing. We're making work that is made to be hung on a gallery wall. But somebody like Angie, who doesn't even necessarily always identify as an artist, or who wouldn't even necessarily call this work an artwork, who didn't stage a spectacle for an audience, is able to create this experience that isn't really dependent on all of those things. It's powerful in and of itself, and there are all kinds of arguments you could make against this, like, it's not art if it's not being discussed in art contexts and all of that kind of stuff, and I get that, but I just can't really let it go. Like, there seems like there's something, like it seems like it really matters. And I would also say that art, even when it's contained and limited in institutions and through that process of, being physically contained in the kind of prison-like space or science laboratory-like space of a museum or a gallery, kind of treated violently, and then deprived of its ability to enact its own power on the world, then re-injected with the complex language of criticism to revitalize it, like a reanimated corpse. It doesn't really lose all of its power anyway. It still continues to do its thing, even with all of that control around it. And that's probably why art keeps getting made. And, I think that wild spirit is probably more powerful than all the efforts to contain it. So I think probably it'll just, overgrow all of those structures and come out on top again. And I know that I'm using lots of different ways of thinking here. That's just where I am with this right now.